Now we're going to cover the concept of warm-up. And there's 3 types of warm-up. The first type is warming up a domain or an IP. We've talked a lot about domain strategy and how when you set up a new subdomain on the back end, it's a brand new subdomain, it's a baby, it has no history, it has no reputation, so you can't just slam 10,000 emails out on it, or you're going to run that sucker right into the ditch. And Google will be proud to show you the line at the bottom of the graph. So warming up a domain or an IP is a strategy, or as my husband and I like to call it, there's some strategery in that. There's also warming up or re-engaging an unengaged list, which is not what we're going to cover in this lesson. We're going to focus on warming up a domain or an IP, but understand that some of these principles could also be used to warm up or re-engage an unengaged list. And then there's warming up contacts, basically to the new idea here that you're actually going to be talking to them. And maybe you're going to be talking to them in a different style than you have in the past. Because maybe you're starting to learn some new things about email marketing and you're going to start to do things different. And now we have to sort of warm up your audience to the idea that your email is now different than what it has been in the past. So today, we're going to focus on warming up a domain or an IP. Even if your IP or your domain, we're going to focus mostly on domains because a lot of you pretty much just have shared IPs. But even if your domain isn't brand spanking new, like you didn't just create, maybe you've been emailing off of it, but what we want to do is move you in the direction of being able to email more and more often. And so the concept of this warm-up, it works for any domain or IP. And especially the new ones or the ones that just need built up. But it works for any domain or IP. Now, we talked about this in a previous lesson, but just to kind of like hone it in here, a warm-up strategy is not just math. It's not, I have people ask me all the time, like, hey, if I'm going to warm up my domain, how many emails can I send? That's kind of like saying, hey, I have this problem with my email deliverability. Can you help me fix it in an hour? It's not quite that easy. There's a little strategery to it. So it's not just math. I can tell you the math. I'd be happy to just give that to you. But the thing is I really want you to be successful in this process and get a good result. So it's both math and engagement, much like climbing the ladder. Remember, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. If we're just doing the left foot, someone's going to get hurt. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid, is a warm-up gone wrong. And I've seen many of those. I've had many people on calls with me telling me that they warmed up their domain. And then when we pull up all the stats and the graphs and we start looking at it, what we see is that they thought they were warming up the domain. Maybe they even did a little ramp up. They might have even tried to send incrementally more email each day, but they just started out with too much, or they just went way too fast and they weren't paying attention to the right foot, right? The engagement. And so remember, the number one goal is to get the highest open rates. If I'm doing a warm up, I desire, I will not allow anything less than 40s for open rates. Because I don't want an average domain reputation out of this. I want a nice high domain reputation out of it. Because I need a starting place that allows me a little bit of cushion, a little bit of a buffer. And so typically when you do the warm-up the way that I'm going to teach you, we actually don't have to worry about hitting 40s. We're usually hitting high 50s and into 60s, sometimes 70s and 80s. It's not hard to get those kinds of numbers when you do it using this strategy. So we're going to start out with the best of the best and send them the most awesome message, and they're going to help us. The second goal is to get the lowest bounce and complaint rates. So we talked about how we want your bounce rates to be well under 1%. If you're my client, I want it to be well under 0.25%. We talked about in a previous lesson, we want complaint rates to be, for Google spam rate, we want that to be well under 1%. If you're my client, I need it to be well under 0.5%. And then inside of the tools you're using where they show you the complaint rates, like in your active campaign or in your MailChimp or in your high level Mailgun, whatever it is, we want those complaint rates, because those are not including Google, remember, we want those to be well under 0.05, 0.05 0.5. There's a 0 in there between the dot and the 5. That's a hard one for people. And if you're my client, we want you no higher than 0.03, especially with a warm-up. Because think about it, you're sending to people who hopefully are going to help you with this process. They're going to give you a nice high open rate and low bounces and complaints. So if we're already starting off on that foot where we're above 0.03 for complaint rate, or we're above 0.0 or 0.5 for Google spam rate, then we're just looking for trouble. This is a representation of what a warm-up looks like. Basically, it started right here and it just kind of ramped up. So each one of those dots is a day. This one was a little higher than I wanted it to be. I didn't want it to be quite that high, but there was a lot of stuff running in the background, and I'm hitting refresh as often as I can, and I'm trying to catch it so I can turn it off before it got too high. I went a little higher than I wanted to, but it's okay because I was also monitoring what the KPIs were on the other side, the engagement. So this was the math, and then I was monitoring the engagement. So the strategy is going to involve daily monitored sends. You have to watch those very carefully. And it starts with looking at, I know this is going to be a shocker, but your open rate. Now, I wrote open rate at the email level because this is really important. There are stats all over the place. Any tool you use, there's stats all over the place. And so sometimes people say, oh, my open rates are such and such. And I'm like, great, where are you seeing that? And they're looking at it at the domain level. Well, that's not the one we need to look at. The domain level is not where people open emails. They open them at the email. They open the email, right? We need to know what this email is doing in terms of performance, not what your domain is doing. How's this email performing? So we look at the open rate at the email level. We look at bounces, though, and complaints at the domain level. At the domain level, because what we're trying to do is protect the domain from getting a bad reputation. And so we need to know how high is the bounce rate at the domain level, how high is the complaint rate at the domain level. Now you can see those kinds of things in emails. Some of the tools show them to you, some don't. Not all tools show you all the stats. Not all tools show you the same stats. Complaints often are not even shown depending on what tool you're using. Bounces are often not just a hard bounce rate depending on what tool you're using. So you really want to try to look at this at the domain level. And then a couple of days later, usually three days minimum after you start this process, 3 days minimum, you're going to start to see Google have an opinion as well. So then you can go into Postmaster and you can see what Google's opinion is of your reputation, which is kind of like the, woohoo, I made it, or, oh, dang, I didn't realize that was happening, because it's just kind of a late discovery. So we're hoping that it's going to work well. And the spam rate, we want to see that too. And by the way, if these people that we're sending to haven't heard from you in a while, and now we're trying to use them to warm up, you might end up with an okay reputation, but your spam rate has a spike in it. You're like, oh, dang, that didn't go so well. Sometimes those things can still work out okay, but we want to really be thinking about who we're sending the emails to. So this is an example of a warm-up email, and you can see the open rate on the right side there was 57.36%. I'm happy with that. If it was 47%, I'd be happy with that too for a warm-up, except for I would start to worry a little bit, because if this is my first batch or my first few batches, I know I'm going to go down from there. It's very hard to maintain an open rate at that level if you're starting with the best part of your list and working your way down. So that's why we want this to be so flippin' high, because we know we're going to come down from there, and we need room for that. And also during a warm-up, we're trying to develop that normal volume and consistency for the domain. Now, I don't have a heart rate that quite looks like the way that that warm-up is going to look. That would be bad. I'm pretty sure you're dying if that's happening. But just to give you some concept, if this was day 1 and this was day 2, there's really nothing happening in between when you're doing a warm-up. You're sort of like controlling, you're metering what's going out on a day-to-day basis.